spooky friends, and welcome to episode 165 of the Scaryish podcast.
Woo!
When Adam was saying, we always say, or Adam always says, in the beginning of every episode, he's always just like, episode da-da-da-da-da starts now. And
that's not at all. I say episode 165 in 3, 2, 1.
But while he said that, I was just like, can't wait till episode 169. Nice.
Nice.
I'm Robin Grace. This is Adam Diaz.
Hello.
We're weird and we talk about weird stuff. And this week, what's your weird thing?
So this week, I'm going to be talking about the simulation hypothesis, which is some weird shit. So strap on for your brains, folks, because I'm about to put a knowledge boner in there.
Oh my god! No, it goes the other way around, because if you're strapping on for your brain's going to be the one doing the...
I don't want to go too deep into this, but yeah, that's what I'm covering. What are you going to be covering this week?
I'm going to be covering The Devil's Sea.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So SEA, not C. I don't know why I'm explaining it to you. Y'all read the title of the episode. You don't need to fucking know.
Sea bass. It's at least a C+.
I hate you. That's a pun from
Animal Crossing.
Animal Crossing. To me, sea bass is the name of some guy from Dumb and Dumber. So
what?
Hopefully some of you heard sea bass and thought of that. So yeah, that's what we're going to go ahead and do for this episode. I do want to say before we jump into it, Robin and I have been watching a little bit of television lately. And I was so excited to talk about this.
He means a lot.
It's not really that much. So two things. WandaVision, episode 5 came out. I really like WandaVision. I'm a big fan of the House of M comic series. So I've been really hoping that that's what WandaVision is based on or around or in some way, shape, or form as an adaptation of that. So if you haven't started WandaVision and you're a Marvel fan and you know what House of M is, I will say it is definitely different, but I was absolutely enthralled at the end of episode 5. I'm just counting the minutes until the next episode comes out. So that's the good.
Yeah.
The bad, we finished a show called The Strain.
And this has been like, oh man, when did The Strain come out?
2014?
15?
Somewhere around there.
Somewhere around there. So that it's been that long for us to finish this show because we watched like the first season and stopped forever.
We watched the first season like as it came out, right?
Yeah.
And then when it hit the season finale, we're like, I don't know if we even care about the second season. Something just didn't click. And Robin recently started watching it. What made you start watching it?
I just got bored and didn't know what to put on, so that's what I put on.
So I started paying attention to it being on in the background around the time it got to the last episode of the first season, because I was like, okay, we're about to get into stuff I haven't seen. And what we would do is essentially watch a season and then take a little bit of a break and watch something else, because the show just never really gained a lot of momentum. Like things happen.
It's a slow burn.
And like slow burn describes so many things, but it's like, imagine a slow burn. We have to keep lighting the fuse because the fuse is just a piece of shit. It's like there's all these flashbacks and like the costume design in the flashbacks is kind of trash. Like they try and make this young actor look old. It just looks terrible. And it's just, there's so much about the show where as we were watching it, I was like, fuck this show, man. I hate this show.
I hate that show.
So I was just so excited.
I like that show, but I hate that show.
Here's the thing about it, is that we got to the end of it, so clearly we didn't hate the show that much, but I did Google what happens in it at like halfway through season 2. I was like, I need to know this is going somewhere.
I want to read the book, because I feel like the book is just going to be so much better.
Well, there's 3 books, there's 4 seasons, and I feel like they left out so much from the book because they were trying to expedite the end, and they still somehow managed to constantly waste fucking time. It's like, it's one of those shows where I felt like everyone's character motivation constantly changes, but their actions are always in direct opposition to what their character's motivations are supposed to be. Because I was so often yelling like, no one would act like that. No one would ever do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Up until the very end of the show, I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? No one would ever behave like this. Like, what is wrong with everyone in the show?
Yeah, it's just a bad ending.
I will say though, a lot of good actors. Yeah. A lot of the people, a lot of the characters in that show, I was like, man.
Kevin Durant.
I really like Kevin Durant. I really like Corey Stoll, who's the guy who's the main character. He's Ephraim. I was like, I think he's really fucking good in it. And then Walder Frey is in it, and I think he plays a really good character too. The guy who plays the German is really good in the show. It's just like they didn't have a lot to work with, and it was a difficult one to get through.
Yeah, so. It took us a long time.
My exact words when the show finished was, man, I can't wait for the episode this week so I can talk shit about The Strain.
Yeah. And
I was just so fucking annoyed.
Even before we started recording, he's like, don't let me forget. Don't let me forget. The first thing we're going to talk about is the strain.
I totally understand if you want to give flashbacks in the midst of action to give you a little bit of background on characters and stuff like that, but carrying it all the way through your entire series, literally up until the climax of the show where it's like, here's a flashback to a year ago when all this stuff was actually happening. It's like, this scene must be completely relevant to what's about to happen at the end of the show. Nope. Totally wasn't. They just tossed it in there because they probably just want to get to the 43-minute runtime for a fucking season finale. Series finale. And then they have a postscript, a PS, like, hey, here's what happened after that.
That shits on your heart.
That's like 90 seconds long and completely shits on everything that happened for the last 3 episodes. You're like, okay, so that whole thing you made us care about didn't matter at all? That's the strain. And scene. And rant.
That's a taste of
I
the
was
movie
so
podcast.
fucking annoyed with the strain, so... Yeah, good stuff, though. I'm happy we got to talk about it. I'm really happy we're done with it. I have no plans to ever go back to it. And if Robin reads the books, I'll ask her how much is different, but I will not go and read those books. So.
All right.
Which is a shame, because I love Guillermo del Toro. And
yeah,
those are
I love
his,
Guillermo del Toro. Cool.
Anyways.
You said you're going to go first. So
I am going to go first, yeah. So this week...
if you guys are still
listening. Someone out there loves the strain. They're like, fuck you both! And they just stop the episode. So anyways, this week I wanted to cover something a little weird, and I definitely overshot. I've been thinking about this one for a while. I've been reading about this for quite some time. And although I haven't really allowed my brain to get too deep in, I'll be the first one to say this topic that I'm covering has seemed to be, to me, like the most absurd, ludicrous thing that I had heard in a really long time. Autocorrect on my Word file, capitalized ludicrous. And I was like,
wow, that's impressive.
He's really made it when Word autocorrects to the uppercase L.
Do you even know what's one song by Ludacris?
No. I did at some point. I'm sure there's something in the back of my brain.
Move, bitch, get out the way. Is that Ludacris?
Maybe. Could be. I don't know. I have no idea, to be honest with you. So I just know he's in the, I was going to say the Fantastic Four movies.
The Fast and the Furious.
The fuck shit of the Furious. My favorite series.
The Fast and the Furious. You know, there are so many people out there that are...
Oh my god. Are we really going to detour before I even get to my first paragraph?
I know. I'm just like all about Fast and the Furious. I'm not all about Fast and the Furious.
I was going to say, no, you're not.
No, but there are people out there that are like absolutely obsessed with all those movies. And I've never seen a single one.
Speaking of saying fuck you to like a work of fiction on a screen... When we went to see Avengers Endgame, I'm pretty sure it was. We were sitting in the theater, and the trailer
Calvin
for
No, wait, it's not Calvin and
I would
Hobbes.
much rather have seen Calvin and Hobbes.
What is the...
Hobbes and Shaw.
Yeah.
Where it shows like The Rock holding on to a fucking truck and holding on to a giant chain that's holding onto a helicopter. And he's like, ah, and he's holding onto both of them. I literally said out loud, like, fuck you. Like, I couldn't help it. It just escaped my lips. So... I'm going to get back to my intro now.
Oh, sorry. You know what? This should have just been a movie podcast episode right now.
Could have been.
Anyway, okay, go.
So anyways, when I started really looking into this particular topic, I began to see a lot of the folks discussing the possibility of this hypothesis. And they were all very well regarded and brilliant people, scientists. So I thought, shit, I better start to read up on this. And the more I did, the more I realized I was going to have to talk about this on the show. So here I am to present to you, dear listener, the simulation hypothesis.
Sounds very authoritative.
It does.
Authoritative?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I would like to reiterate the point that we have been discussing since we started doing Scaryish. We are not scientists. In my 7th grade science class, my teacher said, write down what a scientist is on a piece of paper. And all the kids took out a piece of paper and wrote down the things that they thought a scientist was, like lab coat, glasses, college degree, laboratory, and so on. She then had us all read all the things we wrote down, and someone went up to the board and wrote them all down and put a check mark every time there was a second one to see which ones the most common were. And once we were done, she was like, everyone here is wrong. And not in the, you kids are all fucking idiots way, which I'm sure a lot of teachers would love to scream at their classes multiple times. She basically told us, like, all it takes to be a scientist is to have an idea that you want to test and then to test it in some way, shape, or form. And then we went into what a hypothesis was.
It's the scientific method or whatever.
We went through the scientific method, what a theory was, and then the normal shitty 7th grade science class stuff. Pretty sure we dissected a rat. We dissected something.
Elementary school?
7th grade? It's not elementary. Just FYI.
Even in 7th grade, no.
We definitely dissected something. I can't remember what it was. It wasn't a frog, though. We didn't get frogs.
I didn't get to dissect anything my whole entire education.
Didn't you like opt out of dissecting something? No?
We didn't have that option.
But that's about as close as I ever became to a scientist, still to this day. But I am going to talk about a hypothesis and where it came from, and then why so many people who appear to be smart think this thing holds water. So to give the most bare bones explanation of what the simulation hypothesis is think of the Matrix. I think most of us have either seen the Matrix or know what the Matrix's premise is. All those people in a technologically simulated reality is very similar to what the simulation hypothesis is. The general idea, really. Not that the Matrix itself is real. This hypothesis has actually been around for a long time, like before the Matrix ever came out. But the acknowledgement of the possibility that our reality that we live in is actually a shared simulation. And then the hypothesis also includes the evaluation of what it would take for this to be the case, which gets super interesting. So the crazy thing about the simulation hypothesis isn't the speculating on what sort of technology it would take for this crazy little thing called life to be a simulation. It's the idea behind how we can prove or can't prove whether or not we live in a simulation, which actually gets kind of freaky when you think about it too much. So this particular part of whether or not we can prove was the piece of the hypothesis I struggled with the most. Of course, we're not living in a simulation. Like, how ludicrous would that be? It didn't capitalize at that time. And then if someone were to say, prove it, my brain would kind of just go to, well, I really don't need to. There's no reason to prove it because there's no way to prove it. And that's part of the reason I largely dismissed this topic for a long time when I used to read it when I was younger. But when looking deeper into this theory, I started to understand why so many big brains have weighed in on this and have been asked pretty frequently what they think of it. And the best way I can explain the skepticism behind dismissing this is actually pretty simple. If we are all living in a simulation, we wouldn't know, is what it really comes down to it. And if you don't really think about that too deeply, you're like, yeah, whatever, we wouldn't know, blah, 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 blah.
Are we all NPCs?
But that's another thing is like, we're not exactly NPCs because there's no PC. There's no playable character. So don't think of it like a video game. I think too many people compare this to a video game, and that's absolutely not what it is. So instead of trying to wrap your head around something like the Matrix and that sort of standpoint, think of it like a dream. When you go to sleep, unless you are lucid dreaming, you never know that you're dreaming. You're just in a dream.
Okay.
So, in fact, no matter how absurd a dream becomes, we almost never realize we're dreaming. People could look different. You could literally see someone and be like, that's my dad. And your brain tells you that's your dad. And they could look nothing like your dad, but you're like, that's my dad. And you never fucking question it. In a dream, monsters could be real. You can fly in a dream. You can run endlessly without ever getting tired, which is one of the things that actually makes me realize I'm dreaming is when I'm exercising and I'm like, I can lift all these weights. I can do pull-ups. Like, I'm not getting tired. That's when I'm like, something's amiss. But I've like trained myself. I did it for years to try and lucid dream. And even then, if I notice something's off, I still, most of the time, never realize that I'm dreaming. And a lot of things can happen and you just keep going. You just don't know. And even when in a situation that is absolutely terrifying, like a nightmare where you literally think you're experiencing the fear that something out there is trying to kill you, you still don't realize you're dreaming. So all these different scenarios you can go through and not realize you're in a simulation. Your brain has created a simulation for you to go through while you're in sleep mode, and you just never ever wake up to it. So we don't think of dreams like a simulation, but seriously, it's incredibly accurate. And we still know so little about dreams and sleeping in general, it really starts to boggle your mind about what could be possible. Now, one thing I had to personally separate from this argument was the idea that this simulated reality is all someone or something's dream. Like, I've heard that before too. Like, what if we're all living in someone's dream and if they wake up, we cease to exist? That is not this argument. That's not what this hypothesis is
like
about.
It's like Final Fantasy X or something.
Is it Final Fantasy X?
Where like everybody's living in a dream, or like Titus or whatever his name is dreaming, and so when everybody starts waking up, he disappears. I never played it, so I didn't know that. Oh, okay.
That's what
spoilers!
That's what Link's Awakening is all about, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, he got knocked out, and like everything you do in the game is to get him to wake up, and he realizes near the end, like, if I wake up, they all cease to exist.
Wow.
So it's like super depressing and existential. That's not what this is, okay? This hypothesis is that there is some amazing, unfathomable technology that is running a simulation, and we are all part of that. Our individual consciousnesses are simply a side effect of variables put into a program, and then someone or something basically clicking run. So, where did this hypothesis come from? Well, the first documented argument similar to this that the present day hypothesis is based on actually showed up in the early 1600s.
Wow.
So this is not new. A French philosopher, mathematician, and scientist named René Descartes proposed this idea, but not through the lens of technology like we see it now. It's the same concept, the concept that our reality is fake or a hoax. But rather than an insanely advanced civilization or future humans doing this, Descartes posited that an evil demon, quote, of utmost power and cunning could, quote, employ all his energies in order to deceive me, end quote. This hypothesis really ties in the idea that our reality could be fake with the unknown entity, this time a demon instead of technology, basically creating everything to trick you. This isn't so much a simulation as much as it is like someone's perpetrating a crime against you to torture you or put you in a place where you don't know that you're not in the real world. The demon would make a complete illusion of a world that would completely convince the person being targeted they're in the real world. And I mentioned before that if you think on this particular idea, it gets kind of fucking trippy, and that definitely happens here. Like Descartes describes the effect it would take like this, quote, I shall think that the sky, the air, the earth, colors, shapes, sounds, and all external things are merely the delusions of dreams which he has devised to ensnare my judgment. I shall consider myself as not having hands or eyes or flesh or blood or senses, but as falsely believing that I have all these things, end quote. It's kind of terrifying. It's a really, really slippery slope to question all of reality, especially when the hypothesis itself has no way of proving or disproving the reality you're currently living in, you know? Even the movie Inception had totems, something to tell you whether or not you were awake or not.
Yeah.
Because the idea that you can't trust your reality at all and there's no way to prove it is really haunting. It's totally terrifying. That's like the whole end of the movie, you know? Spoiler for Inception. Skip ahead 15 seconds if you haven't heard this. But in the end, like, you're not quite sure whether or not he's awake or not.
Because you don't see if the top falls or not.
Because the camera goes dark. I don't know if you guys know this. Skip ahead 15 more seconds, just in case. Maybe make it 30 seconds. But Christopher Nolan totally gave an interview, and they asked him whether or not he was awake. And he said there's one totem he put in the movie that no one picked up on, and anytime you see the totem, he's awake. And it's Michael Caine. Anytime you see Michael Caine, he's in the waking world. And he's with Michael Caine when he sees his kids. So he actually made it back to his kids.
The thing that confused me about the kids is they're wearing like the same
It's not the same clothing. I've seen that movie 5 times in theaters. It's not the same clothing. It's just similar clothes.
Okay.
So everyone said that because they wanted to be like, he's still in the dream. Like, it's not the same clothing. All right. Anyways, moving forward. It's a good example, though. That movie boggled everyone's minds. Everyone was like, what's real? What's the dream?
It's a good movie. If you have not seen Inception, I've probably watched that movie a bunch of times. Maybe not as many as you, but I have watched it a bunch of times just because it's enjoyable. Just because the whole messing with your mind thing and going further into the levels and things like that. It's just so cool.
If you sit down and really think about this theory too, about like, how would you be able to disprove a simulation? Like, how could you prove to yourself that you're real or the people you're around are real? You know, There's really just not a lot you can do. And I think that because this idea was basically brought up in the early 1600s, it didn't gain a lot of traction because back then when people were like proposed this question and they started to realize the terrifying existential nature of it, the hypothesis was basically answered with, well, God wouldn't let that happen.
Oh, gotcha.
So it's not shocking to hear that the church officially banned all of the books of Descartes in 1663. The idea stayed around, but wasn't really expanded upon until the late 1900s. Side note, it's really weird to say the late 1900s. Because it's like it's a century ago and it's a millennia ago technically.
Wow.
But I was born in the late 1900s. I was actually born before this thing surfaced again.
Fred Astaire was born in 1899.
I didn't know that. Interesting.
You're welcome.
Anyways, a man named Hans Moravec returned this idea to the forefront of some minds in 1998 with his paper titled Simulation, Consciousness, Existence. And in this paper, he talks a lot about the same things. He brings up Descartes and how this idea holds all this, much more water when you compare it to technology. And it's a concept that he applies from 350 years ago to present day and uses the idea that as technology advances, things like computer simulations could exist that would allow for inhabitants to experience a virtual reality within that would let them go about their quote unquote lives. I should now point out that March 31st, 1999, a year later, The Matrix came out.
Wow.
So this got brought up. Then The Matrix hits, and The Matrix is basically the practical application of this theory in terrifying science fiction format, where it's like the apocalypse happened because we created artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence evaluated us as pieces of shit and decided to get rid of us except to use us as batteries. Spoiler alerts. That was fucking 22 years ago. If you haven't seen The Matrix and heard the twist yet, that's on you.
What?
What?
You've not seen The Matrix? In The Matrix?
You don't remember the big reveal where he holds up a battery is like to turn a human being into this.
I don't remember that.
It's a battery.
Okay, honestly, I haven't seen The Matrix over 2 decades.
Robin's a fucking Etch-a-Sketch, man.
I know,
she basically
dude.
relearns
Holy
everything
shit.
every 2 or 3 years.
All I remember is The Matrix 3 had Trinity shove her fist into Neo's chest or something,
happen.
right?
That didn't happen.
What was it the other way around?
And it was The Matrix. It was the second one.
Okay.
Which isn't Revolutions. It's Reloaded, I think, which is such a shitty name for the second movie.
Okay, so what happened?
He just takes the bullet out of her.
Oh, okay.
He gets shot. He's like, I'll take that out because I'm the one.
I thought she ends up saving someone's life. I forget.
I mean, she saves a lot of people's lives, but no, that's not what happens.
Okay.
She doesn't have those powers. Okay. Let's get back into this. So within 2 years of The Matrix coming out.
I don't remember anything.
I know you don't. It's kind of scary. Within 2 years of The Matrix coming out, a new take on the idea emerges and circulates for another 2 years before it gains real popularity in 2003. And it's titled, Are You Living in a Computer Simulation? It's by a guy named Nick Bostrom. And to this day, this is the one. This is the paper that everyone still talks about. The difference in this version of the theory or hypothesis is the, quote, trilemma, which is like a dilemma, but with 3, hence tri.
Okay.
So the options in the paper are these. These are the 3 things that basically you have to choose from if you're examining this idea to state one of these must be the case. The first one is, and this is a quote, the fraction of human-level civilizations that reach a post-human stage, which is defined as one capable of running a high-fidelity ancestor simulation, is very close to 0. An ancestor simulation would be if we, way further down the future, would be like, let's make a computer program, put in all the data we need, hit play, and see if things unfold like they did for our ancestors, to watch how as society builds itself, basically. The second thing is the fraction of post-human civilizations that are interested in running simulations of their evolutionary history or variations thereof is very close to 0. So you either have to choose whether or not you think that there are civilizations that are so far advanced that are very close to 0, or you have to choose that you think that the fraction of civilizations that do exist at that level just really aren't interested. Or number 3, the fraction of all people with our kind of experiences that are living in a simulation is very close to 1. To break that third one down, he uses the word fraction very distinctly, because when he says very close to 1, think of like 99 over 100.
That's everyone.
It's basically almost everyone that's gone through what we have gone through is probably living in a simulation. Because imagine one society that gets to the point where they're this post-human civilization where they can build a simulation. You wouldn't just do one. You'd do a bunch. You'd do variations of a bunch of different things like, well, let's see what would happen if we took out Hitler. Let's see what happens if we stepped on that butterfly in 1993. And the idea is that the more likely you find it that a civilization could reach this level, the more likely it is that we're actually living in a simulation.
That seems a bit outlandish.
Because any form of existence, whether it's real or artificial, there should be more artificial simulations than there would be like real people out there, basically. Which is the part that really boggled everyone's minds, that really got them to start thinking about this in different ways. A few things can get pulled from these ideas. One is that any, quote, post-human civilization would be able to run all these simulations on their own ancestral development. A lot of people have some arguments where they're like, well, maybe aliens have this technology and then they would run it on us, which brings in another group of people that say, why the fuck would they care about us? Why wouldn't they run it on themselves? So this thing really spirals out of control and people just start arguing all these different points. Basically, they just say that they're going to put in a bunch of data and click run, which we already know. But reading through this, my thought immediately was like, why? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized like, maybe they'd want to study early man the way, I don't know, present day humans do. Like I just got done talking about all the different subspecies of human beings last episode and how we react to other men or how we react to things that don't look right. So maybe it's just morbid curiosity. You want to see if you can put in all this data and if it'll track exactly how things actually happen. Maybe they want to study how historical events likely did unfold versus the recorded history. I think most people know the older you get, the more you read history. History books are typically bullshit, especially when they're being taught at a very young level. And then you realize there's all this depth and nuance because history is essentially written by the winners, which are not normally the good people. So sometimes they whitewash things out of human recorded history.
Yeah.
And you find out later when you like hear spoken tale or find other written works where you're like, oh, this is the horrible version of what actually happened.
Yeah.
So to me, I thought about it like, well, what if we just set all these things up, simulated to a point, and then we're like, all right, now everyone, let's watch like, I don't know, some random date, like 1092. Let's see what actually happened that year, you know?
I really like I like watching it too. I like reading revisionist history.
Revisionist history? It's a weird way to say that.
Like, books where it's like in World War II, but different things are happening in World War II. Like Man in the High Castle. Like,
alternate history. Revisionist history is a very different thing.
Whatever.
I like reading when people take out all the bad things and lie.
No, it's just, I like reading those interesting books that people write.
Like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Yeah, like weird books like that. And this is just what it makes me think of, like different histories and different things that were possible maybe.
It's weird to think that the history that you think is actually real could be an alternate history or revisionist history. So I thought about that, and I thought maybe that's why someone would want to run a simulation like further on down the road if you were able to do it. So the third option, though, is the one that he does build on in the paper, which is not shocking because it's the one everyone got attached to. The idea that if you can run multiple simulations, then the number of, quote, simulated ancestors in the universe would be way, way higher than the number of total, quote, actual ancestors, which is just a weird way of saying people. The idea continues to grow that any people with our experiences and with our trajectory of technological development like we have had, and with our penchant for studying all the things, including and especially ourselves, it just naturally goes to say that we're going to eventually develop a simulation like it's being described.
Okay.
So after he goes through all this shit and boggles everyone's minds, he breaks down the three scenarios and the deductions that you can take from them. So scenario 1, and I'll recap it in normal talk. The amount of these post-human civilizations being nearly zero. If you think that's the most likely, he says, if 1 is true, then we will almost certainly go extinct before reaching post-humanity. Basically, if you think that it's more likely that there are almost no post-human civilizations out there, then it's most likely we won't get there. We'll disappear before that ever happens. And that's terrifying. Scenario 2 is that post-human civilizations that do exist might not really be interested in running a simulation, that their interest would be close to zero.
I feel like the way our world's going, we're going to want to run a simulation.
So he says if 2 is true, then there must be a strong convergence among the courses of advanced civilizations so that virtually none contains any individual who desire to run ancestor simulations and are free to do so. So basically what that means is if you think that there are advanced civilizations, but they don't want to run sims on us, then you think that somehow no one ever thought of this idea in this super advanced civilization, or they thought of it and have completely prohibited it from being done. So that's a little bit curious and also kind of terrifying. And then scenario 3, the one that everyone found super fascinating, which is the fraction of people with our experiences in a simulation is close to 1, which is to say anyone who has gone through what humans have gone through are almost certainly living in a simulation.
That's nuts.
So he says if 3 is true, then we almost certainly live in a simulation. So he's positing that if you think simulations are something that an advanced civilization would do, then you have to accept the fact that it's the most likely thing that we are in one right now. Not that we're on our way to developing them, that it's already happened and what we're in is the simulation. And this is basically just statistical analysis. Like, The likelihood that we're in one is far more likely than we're not, which is terrifying. Now, this hypothesis is taken differently by lots of different folks.
I was going to say, that's weird.
You could be hearing this right now and be like, fuck this, I hate it, or this is bullshit, or this is interesting. But Bostrom even talks about how when presented with the trilemma, which just sounds like something the Try Guys came up with, that folks vary on which number they pick, but when people do pick 1, 2, or 3, they tend to pick that one and state that it's not only possible, but extremely likely. So if you think 1 is the one that made the most sense to you, you likely think 2 and 3 are total bullshit, and that 1 is almost certainly going to happen. So that's why when people think scenario 3 logically makes the most sense, you see people announcing things like, we're most likely living in a computer simulation, which there's so many fucking headlines out there like that. For example, Elon Musk thinks, based on the rate of video game development that he has witnessed in his lifetime, eventually games will be indistinguishable from reality. And that train of thought leads him to believe that we're, quote, most likely living in a simulation. So, for those of you out there who love Elon Musk, he thinks we're living in a simulation. I just want to say as a side note, Elon did lay me off before, so what the fuck does he know? Just saying. Neil deGrasse Tyson stated he gives it, quote, better than 50-50 odds that we're living in a computer simulation.
Wow.
He expanded when asked why and said, quote, I wish I could summon a strong argument against it, but I can find none. So these are two people that are pretty famous, at least, for being relatively smart.
I literally have his book.
Stating that they believe we're living in a simulation, or most likely we're living in a simulation. Folks believe there need to be scientific experiments to determine whether the reality we are living in is, quote, real, or if we can somehow prove that it's a simulation. And that one really fucks me up. The trying to prove we're living in some place that's fake. Because if you're looking for a specific answer, you're probably going to find it, you know? You're going to go through your findings and decide, like, the evidence points to the solution that I thought was the true one. You know, you're never really looking for the one you don't believe. Mm-hmm. You're typically, it's like just the bias that normal people have. That sort of goes hand in hand with the idea that we need to unlock the secrets of the universe, which you hear people talking about how we study things like the Big Bang and all these other things. And finding inconsistencies in the nature of the universe is something that, as we learn more, will basically lead more folks to believe option number 3 is the case. I just held up 2 fingers, and it makes me really happy that you guys can't see me right now because I'm an idiot.
That's really terrifying.
I know. One of the things that has been discussed is the idea that we are unable to travel faster than the speed of light. Again, this is theoretical shit. I mean, we have noticed the gravitational waves and how they distort time and things like that. So folks are starting to think that some of these things aren't constants or permanents or rules of the universe, but who the fuck knows? Like, the example of a rule or a limitation existing gives folks the idea that a simulation was built to give us constraints to make sure that we stayed within the confines of our quote-unquote experiment or simulation.
There are things that we keep breaking the boundary of, though.
Like?
The speed of sound.
Well, I mean, that is something that was a constant, but we've been able to witness things go faster than that.
Yeah.
Like a comet or an asteroid or something moving faster than what we would know. Like, we can go to Mach 1 and Mach 2 and Mach 3.
Yeah.
But to this point, we've decided, or we think theoretically based off the math, which I don't understand, that we cannot go faster than the speed of light. And it gives the idea that maybe the universe itself is like the hard drive. And each galaxy or each whatever you want to quantify as like a distance of space that exists in the universe is its own simulation. And by putting travel limitations in there, like can't go faster than the speed of light, speed of light's going to be the constant, it keeps any simulations from overlapping. So we can't cross over into another galaxy that might be a different simulation running where everyone had boners on their face. Or who the fuck knows what variable will be different. Or maybe... What's that?
Cronenberg.
Right? It's very Rick and Morty shit. Or maybe that the post-human civilization has developed technology. This is my thought. I didn't read this anywhere. This is an Adam original. I thought that maybe the reason that the speed of light is the constant, if a post-human civilization exists, is because although they developed the technology to have a simulation, they still haven't developed any technology to travel faster than the speed of sound. And while it might not be impossible, it makes more sense to me that we developed computing technology to the point of realistic simulation before we developed warp speed or warp drive or something that can adjust or make us go faster than the speed of light.
All right.
So rather than putting something into the universe that they're creating that they haven't created yet, they're like, just make it a constant. We can't figure it out. They can't figure it out. Fuck them.
Okay.
Or maybe they want us to try and figure it out. And they change things so that we can test different theories that they're not able to test in their reality. Like maybe they ran out of some sort of fossil fuel that might be needed to go faster than the speed of light. Just spun that one right off the dome piece, brother. I hope I don't get us reset. Maybe I'm getting way too close to reality.
Are you saying like someone out there was just like, hey, that Newton guy, just drop something on him. Make him figure that shit out.
No, I'm saying like maybe they ran out of something that they realized later was the key component to developing like light speed technology, but because they can't test it, they can't go any further than where they've gotten to. So they're like, make a computer program that simulates if uranium still exists. I'm just picking uranium because it makes shit blow up. But they're like, but make uranium still exist. That way they can test it in the computer simulation and they have all the data because they know exactly how it behaves. And then maybe we can figure it out through that.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
It's just, there's so many fucking, my brain is starting to hurt just talking about this. If I get a nosebleed, I'm pretty sure they're killing me. Like they're going to take me out right now. They're deleting my programming. So for every person that hears this
really
theory,
scary to hear
right?
you say, please don't get deleted.
For every person that hears this theory, there is an opinion. Everyone has an opinion on this. By the way, don't try and argue with me about this. I'm telling you this. I'm not saying I wrote this and this is what it is. I'm just relaying you the information. If you want to at someone, at the dude who wrote this, okay? One particular terrifying theory or opinion is that if we are able to prove through experimentation that we live in a simulation, say some scientist cracks the code and realizes this whole thing is fucking fake, telling the inhabitants of the world that that's the case would render our simulation useless. The fact that we would know it would mean that we're no longer programming properly.
Yeah.
Or running properly, which would result in our collective plugs being pulled. We would be turned off. And maybe the nature of the discussion itself and the fact that that hasn't happened yet shows we're not in a simulation. But the scariest thing to me about the simulation hypothesis is, depending on how deeply we buy into this thing as we go on, the only way we may ever be able to prove that we are not living in a simulation is to create an ancestor civilization in a simulation at some point. So basically, everything we just went through, this existential dread that this may all be fake, this horrible thing that's fucking terrifying to imagine being true, the only way to make sure it's not true and to give us peace of mind is to create it and have it be true for something else. Which would have to mean that we develop technology that would be able to support something like reality that we're in right now, which would necessitate us developing conscious and autonomous thinking artificial intelligence, which is basically creating something that thinks on its own without you giving it any programming and will think beyond the limits of what you originally assigned it to do, which itself is an absolutely terrifying concept. It's what like every science fiction thing besides The Matrix is based off of, like Terminator and AI.
What if this is a simulation and they're like, what are they going to do about their natural resources? Let's find out.
Maybe. Who the fuck knows, dude? Who knows? Lots of folks do dismiss this idea outright, though. When broken down, you could posit that there are other civilizations that have decided to simulate us. But like so many people say, like, if you think aliens exist, why the fuck would you think they cared about us? You know?
Yeah.
There was an experiment done that I am not nearly articulate enough to describe that studied whether a simulation technique called Monte Carlo simulations would sustain quantum systems, which would be necessary to simulate our reality, which is essentially the way we use computers now. And for the foreseeable future, could we, theoretically, simulate a quantum computer within the computing software or the computing methods we have now? It's so fucking weird. It made my brain explode. And they were able to consistently prove that you cannot use quantum computers within a simulation. So think like Minecraft, how they can assign rules in Minecraft where people can build like a microchip and show like electricity will flow through it like it's actually supposed to. Now imagine someone wants to go into Minecraft and build a quantum computer. Like, there's no amount of programming in the universe that we can currently do that would allow that to happen. It would always fail. That's basically what they tried to prove, and they say they proved it. And when they did that, they said, this proves we're not in a computer simulation right now. It's like, it can't be. And I don't know why that is.
Because we can make our own quantum computers?
No, because we can't simulate them within there.
Okay.
Which, I don't know why that disproves it, but they basically made this statement in 2017 saying, we proved we're not in a computer simulation, and the people that believe it were like, That doesn't prove it. Yes, we are.
Well, it's because if they can't make it in their computer, why would we be able to make those computers in our reality if we were in a simulation?
But not one further step down, right?
Yeah.
It's just so fucking mind-boggling, this whole thing. And when I read that, I was like, I don't understand why that disqualifies it, but apparently it does. And according to basically everyone that thought that we were living in a computer simulation, it doesn't. Everyone just basically retreated back into their camps, and they had some scientific dick measuring about bad science, and then they just all decided to believe what they believed to start with. So others point to the lack of intelligent alien life discovered, which has not happened yet, as evidence that this must be a simulation that's only focused on humanity, as other species not being present when they statistically should be is highly suspicious. One of the creepiest things discovered, and this one blew me the fuck away, is that a physicist named James Gates, while he was studying string theory that describes the fundamental particles of the universe, found what he states are, quote, error-correcting codes while studying string theory. And he literally stated, it's like computer code that is used to make web browsers function. He stated, quote, so why were they in the equation I was studying about quarks and electrons and supersymmetry? They're like identical, the pictures of them and like the theoretical images of these two things. And one of them is computer code and the other one is supposed to be a building block of the universe. And this dude was so creeped out, he published it and was just like, I'm stopping whatever I'm studying right now because people need to know about this.
Wow.
It's fucking weird, dude.
I'm not at all smart enough to understand half these things.
Electrons, by the way, are involved in that. And electrons are sus as fuck, by the way. I remember reading about this and I did not realize it's connected when I did. So there's an experiment. I know this is really long, but we talked about the strain for the first 15 minutes, so bear with me.
I was going to say, oh my God, you almost have a whole hour to yourself.
So there's this experiment called the double slit experiment.
Sounds hot.
I knew you were going to say that. So what happens is electrons are shot at a photosensitive screen through slits in a copper plate. And when it happens, they produce an interference pattern that indicates wave-like behavior. Which is strange. Thing? I don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Oh,
what pudding thing you're talking about?
There was an experiment that was like they put atoms into something and they shot energy into it, and the atoms in that little vessel or whatever they used looked like bread pudding of some type, where it's just all these. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so let me finish this one, and you can tell me if this is the same thing. So basically, they shoot electrons through a copper plate at a photosensitive screen, and when that happens, the interference pattern looks wave-like, okay?
Okay.
Then they decided that they were going to observe it. So they got their readings, they're like, oh, that's super interesting, we don't know why that's happening. So they put observation on it as it was happening, and the electrons behaved like particles and not waves. They behaved completely differently. The only thing that's different, no matter how many times this experiment has been run, is that it's being observed. Anytime you see it when it's being done, they behave properly. When you take away the observation and just measure the results, they behave completely differently. And this is what quantum physics is. The idea that something can exist in two separate states, and the only thing that's different is whether or not you're looking at it. That's the Schrodinger's cat thing.
That's some weeping angels shit.
It's the Schrodinger's cat thing where there's a cat. That's the whole experiment. The whole Schrodinger's, it's not an experiment, but the theory is that a cat could be in a box, and when you open the box, you'll find out whether or not the cat is alive or dead. But while the box is closed, the cat is both. And the decision is only made by the particles when it becomes observed. And that shit boggles the fuck out of my mind, how two things can coexist in the same state. So this is an actual experiment where they're like, this is an example of Schrodinger's cat or quantum physics existing.
Wow, that's
where,
weird.
Depending on whether or not you're looking at it, it behaves completely differently. That's why quantum computers are so fucking weird. So I don't want to get balls deep in quantum computers, but essentially imagine a 1 and a 0, okay? That's what computing code is basically all based off of, ones and zeros and how they line up. In quantum physics, you don't have a 1 and a 0. You have a single thing that can be either, depending on what it needs to be at that given moment. Shit's so fucking weird. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, I'm not a scientist. I'm not smart enough for this shit. I'm just dumb.
There's lots of shit in quantum theory that's going to blow your mind. So this is just an example where people took this experiment, and this was done in like 1997, and has been replicated every time they do it. And now they're saying like, hey, if this were a simulation, this might be why it's happening. It's behaving one way because we're not looking at it, but based on the rules of our simulation, when we look at it, it has to behave the way we're expecting it to behave. which people are starting to pull more and more things that don't exactly make sense because we can't explain them yet, and attach it to this theory of like, maybe this is a fucking simulation. And the rules of the simulation are being broken as long as we're not watching, because we don't have to observe the fact that they're being broken, which is fucking mind-boggling. And for me, it sounds like a much more intelligent way of people seeing bizarre occurrences and attaching incorrect, unprovable logic to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, this is the most advanced, mind-fuckable way you could say, hey, look, the sun rose. It must have been a god that does that. And then you come up with a story about how the god like is fighting off the darkness and whatever that old myth was from like the gods of Egypt. I haven't seen the Gods of Egypt movie in a long time. It wasn't very good. But it's like...
Wait, no, what's that? Is it Clash of Titans where he goes to, like, the sun has to... The guy that controls the sun has to fight.
No, it's Gods of Egypt. That's why I said Gods of Egypt.
What
Clash of Titans is where they fight Kronos. That's actually Wrath of the Titans. Clash of the Titans is where he fights the Kraken.
Okay.
Which doesn't have anything to do with the sun. So anyways, the debate continues. It's going to go on and on for a very long time. The idea of if we are not running our own simulation, we must likely be in one right now. It seems far too accepted to me. When you sit down and let your mind swirl with the possibility, I kind of get why people think that. Like, you think that if we are living in a simulated world, it's like really hard to escape the question of how would we ever know? And I think that's what really boggles people's minds. And what if the reason some people are so unlucky is because they just need like a firmware update, or for some reason, like they have a bug in their coding and they just aren't compatible with like literally with the world around them. Like, I feel like that's just a horrible way to look at it. But at the same time, like if you're looking at everything through the scope of like, we're living in a simulation, it kind of makes sense to me. Or what if the programming that was built for this simulation was flawed in some way that wouldn't reveal itself until later in the simulation? Like, y'all remember what happened with Zune, right? When everyone had Zunes and iPods and all of a sudden out of nowhere, all the Zunes bricked and were fucking unusable.
Shut up.
Yeah, some third-party programmer that wasn't even Microsoft programmed their calendar incorrectly to not account for leap year. And after they got past a certain date, the programs were completely incompatible on the operating system and you couldn't fucking use the thing anymore. Like, it happened. It 100% happened, but it was programming that people didn't notice was wrong until all these people had bought it. It's not shocking that Zunes basically are non-existent anymore. And I saw a few folks that pointed to recent crazy events as examples that our simulation's malfunctioning and what do you think's going to happen if someone comes to repair it or reset it? And I'm just like, if you think things are like malfunctioning right now because of a pandemic and because an election didn't go the way you wanted it to.
Someone's playing Plague Inc. out there.
For me, that's just like, you must not have been paying any attention to literally any of human history, because it's like, how many things in human history were much worse than this?
Yeah.
So, or even crazier than this. Just looking at everything, it's like, do I think we're living in a computer simulation after reading all this shit and going through this super deep subject? No, probably not. And probably is the best I can do, but I'm going to go with probs not.
Probs not.
I do remember one particular line, and I kept thinking about this during this topic, from the movie The Matrix. The first one, where they said when they created the first version of The Matrix, it was a paradise. And that it failed miserably because humans couldn't accept perfection and were constantly trying to wake up from it. Which would explain why there are still flaws in the world. And that, mixed with all the things that I've studied today and the stuff I talked about last week, like the uncanny valley response to lifelike simulations of humans, made me feel like maybe that's the part of us that's still human rejecting something that is not perfect enough in our simulation, where we sort of have our instincts crop up because we realize, like, this is a simulation. That's not right. I can tell that's not right. And that's why we reject certain things so vehemently, but only in the uncanny valley. Maybe that's why we triggered so hard. I don't know. It's a lot of thoughts swirling around in my brain right now.
It's a lot of stuff for my brain to hurt over.
I know. I do think there's still plenty we can't explain. And we still shouldn't do the thing that we've normally done in human history, which is chalk it up to something we can never prove, just because we can't figure it out yet. I do feel equally as terrified, though, that we could be in a simulation right now as we're going to create one in the future. Like, I sincerely hope we find something else to occupy our time with, should we become one of these, quote, post-human civilizations. All I know is we don't have individual jetpacks yet, so I can't believe we're talking about computer simulations like this.
Post-human civilizations are kind of like transcendence type things, right? Where they take our consciousness out of our body.
I mean, no, you're just attaching a whole different line of thought to it. It's just the idea that you get past where we're at now as human beings to a state where we're technology advanced enough where we want to study the past through technology.
Okay.
So you're thinking of like other theories, like, which is funny because
I'm just thinking like no more people exist and it's all AI just wanting to.
No, nothing like that.
Okay.
It's funny though because there is one guy who talks about the transcendence of human consciousness into something else. And it is the guy who wrote the paper from 1998.
Shut the front door.
Who was like taking the theory from 350 years ago and applying it to like advancing technology. He has other shit where he's talked about like the cleanliness of transcendent human consciousness.
Is this guy just nutso?
And then Transcendence came out with Johnny Depp and that movie sucked. So I think everyone was like, yeah, we don't need that. So anyways, that is I had to make it long enough to try and make folks understand what the fuck this crazy shit is because it just pooped in my brain, so and I hope it didn't hurt you too much, but that is the simulation hypothesis.
I just don't know why I'm going second then. My topic's going to be like such a letdown after that one.
I mean, my script was like super short compared to my normal script, so we talked a lot about it.
And about the strain.
And we talked a lot about the strain. I'm putting 15 minutes of this on the strain, so.
All right.
Anyways, before we move into Robin's topic, we are going to take a quick commercial break.
All right, everyone, welcome to the other half of this episode. It's not going to be as mind-boggling. It's going to be strictly more like lore and legend and random theories, I guess. That. Okay.
I was so afraid last episode everyone would hate my topic, and people were really nice. They reached out, so please don't hate my topic this time.
All right, so this week I'm going to cover a different version of an old familiar tale like the Bermuda Triangle. And this one is called the Devil's Sea. So we're going to head over to one of my favorite places in the world, Japan. If you couldn't have guessed already.
I was like, Disneyland.
Oh, yeah, I love that place too.
I mean, Japan has 2 Disneylands.
Oh, no. Well, Tokyo Disney and then Disney Sea. It's kind of like how we have Disneyland and California Adventure.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about, though. All right, so I definitely think we should all steer clear of this quote-unquote Devil's Sea, just saying. But I still want to go to Japan. Just skip the scary boat parts of it.
Well, give me the coordinates so I know what to avoid.
The Devil's Sea is also called the Ma no Umi, which is also known by a number of different things, like the Dragon's Triangle, or the Formosa Triangle, or the Pacific Bermuda Triangle.
It seems weird to call it Pacific Bermuda.
Is the Bermuda Triangle in the Pacific?
No, it's in the Caribbean.
Okay. So, I mean, it makes sense.
Near
then, right?
Bermuda.
Oh. Okay, that's why. So this mysterious section of the ocean exists just south of Tokyo and is considered a paranormal location. Though, for a lot of reasons, I don't think it's very paranormal at all. But it's Japan, so obviously there's gonna be weird stuff, because why wouldn't it have its own creepy mystery ocean? It already has the Aokigahara Forest.
Right.
So, I mean, it could branch out to the ocean. It can do whatever it wants to.
I mean, a sea is different than the ocean, let's be fair.
Is it?
Yeah, it's much smaller.
Really?
An ocean is the most massive body of water that you can find on the planet.
Okay, well...
sea is different.
Well, this is off the coast of Japan, and it's straight into the ocean.
Yeah, sometimes you have a sea that flows like the Baltic Sea. That's not an ocean. Sometimes they can meet up and stuff like that. I know the Baltic Sea doesn't meet up with any ocean.
So when I talk about this, it's going to be like straight into the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
There's no sea there. I mean, the ocean is a sea, technically.
You're being a real sea right now.
Shut up. Okay, so I will start by saying that there are a lot of those that doubt any of these claims, because some of them just seem so outlandish. And, I mean, the ocean can be a really mysterious place in general. I know Adam likes to point out that boat disappearances don't happen any more in these areas than they do in other areas. So having said that, I mean, Adam's like...
That's not what I say.
What did you say?
I literally brought it up when she told me what she was doing. I was like, a lot of folks say that in the Bermuda Triangle, boat accidents and plane accidents and things like that don't happen more frequently than they do anywhere else, but that's actually not true.
Oh, you said the opposite.
Yeah, it's specifically because when people say that, they leave out the fact that, and I gave you this example too, that you could pick a random part of the Pacific Ocean that's the exact same size as the Devil's Sea or the Bermuda Triangle, and based off of ocean traffic or air flights, because there's not a lot there per capita, they actually don't have nearly as many as these places, which is what makes them very suspicious. In the Bermuda Triangle's case, it is only slightly elevated. It's not like it's much more dangerous than all these other heavily trafficked areas, but it does have a very vicious underwater current that is totally explainable for why a lot of things disappeared, especially before we got really good ships.
If you want to hear about Adam talking about the Bermuda Triangle, you can go back to the episode where he talks about
There's
it.
There's totally a shipwreck where they wound up finding the fucking debris like all the way up into the Carolinas, and it wrecked in the Caribbean because the underwater current was just like, I'll take that body and that treasure chest and just go dump it thousands of miles away.
All right. So anyway, having said all that, let's get into it.
I love that you're like, as Adam likes to say, and I'm like, I did say something earlier, and that's the opposite of what I said. I was like, I didn't say that.
Oh, it's our relationship wrapped up in a nice little present.
It really is.
All right, so the Japanese name Ma-no-umi translates to something like evil or troublesome ocean, and apparently this is a general term, like a little generalized term that they use to describe different dangerous bodies of water all over the world. So there are a bunch of these scattered, and they just name all the different really dangerous places to go that name, which is terrifying. And
so there's multiple Devil's Seas?
No, but like there's different areas of the world's oceans that have dangerous areas, which I think is terrifying, but totally understandable because like, if you look at the Titanic, that wasn't anywhere near the Bermuda Triangle or this Devil's Sea or anything like that. But that quote-unquote unsinkable ship went down because of so many different unforeseen circumstances.
Right.
So I can totally understand how there are so many different dangerous places all over the world because the ocean is a scary place. There's lots of dangerous straits and places that you can take your boats that you really shouldn't.
I was totally thinking of straits.
Yeah.
Because there's always like super shallow areas out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Where they're like, you will wreck your ship there.
Yeah. So I can totally see how there are a bunch of these, quote unquote troublesome oceans all over. This particular one seems to have stories of a mysterious woman that sails around in the area in a ship in the early 1880s. And I'm just going to say it's probably because people back then were like, what? A woman captaining her own ship? That's weird. And it's just sexist. I mean, there really isn't any other in-depth reports of this ghostly or mysterious woman captaining a ship or sailing a ship around these waters. I just thought like the one source that I saw that I was like, that's dumb. Because it's probably
so it's basically sexism masking itself as paranormal activity.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was just like, that's ridiculous. Okay. So on January 4th, 1995, there was a Japanese ship named the Shinyo Maru, number 10. So it's probably the 10th one in line. Who knows? But it lost radio contact near a place called Mikurajima, which is an island off of Tokyo. And newspapers in Japan were beginning to label the area as one of these, like, troublesome oceans or dangerous places. But the ship ended up showing up 11 days later.
So it was just late.
So it did get lost. And when the ship finally showed up, they questioned the crew. And they lost radio contact, and things just weren't working. But it turns out that it was just a bunch of normal out at sea problems that caused them to be 11 days late.
Did they get drunk and just sail in circles?
No, I'm sure there was like, storms out at sea or something like that just caught them way off course. Or, like in the Bermuda Triangle where stuff stops working, like all your compasses, things like that stop working. So, and you're in the middle of the ocean. You don't see anything when you're in the middle of the ocean, right? It's ocean as far as you can see.
Except the stars, Bowen. You don't get that one. I just realized you've never watched Dragonheart.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Okay. I've read Aragorn.
I've never read it, so I can't tell you if it's similar. I was just thinking, like, didn't they used to navigate via stars when they can't see anything?
Aragon. Not Aragorn. Aragorn's the guy from Lord of the Rings.
Viggo Mortensen.
Aragon. Okay.
I was just thinking, though, like, if there is storms, you wouldn't be able to see the stars. So if your navigational equipment failed and you had no celestial objects to navigate by. It's got to be so terrifying, man.
Yeah,
you don't see land anywhere. You're just in the middle of like really high tides. I don't know if it's called high tides, high waves, and a bad storm. I would probably be delayed for 11 days too, and I'd probably show up and be like, I need new pants now.
Yeah. So there really wasn't any magical mystery to them disappearing, but a Japanese newspaper named the Yomiuri Shimbun published a map of the surrounding area, like the surrounding sea, and points at places where a number of other ships had been lost in recent years. Apparently, these ships had been lost in an area of the ocean that the Yokohama Coast Guard had classified as a special dangerous area.
That's interesting.
And it really makes you wonder why this area is like particularly dangerous. It wasn't until the New York Times out here in the US wrote about the area, and they're the ones that started calling it the Devil's Sea. And they brought up this topic and they wrote about an area of the ocean where 9 ships got lost in perfectly clear weather.
That's terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, it's some Bermuda Triangle stuff, you know? In this Japanese paper, the area is described to span from the Izu Islands to east of the Ogasawara Islands. And that's about 200 miles from east to west and about 300 miles north to south. And apparently 9 ships were lost in that area within the span of 5 years. And these were supposedly freight ships that carried functional radio transmitters. And that's almost 2 ships a year. That's a lot of ships. I mean, losing 1 ship in a year is probably devastating to a company or whatever.
When you say lost, do you mean they went down?
Like they went down and disappeared.
And they've never seen again?
Yeah.
Wow, that's terrifying.
But yeah, so that's a lot of stuff to go missing in 5 years. Legend has it that one of the ships actually got a chance to put out a distress call before they went missing. But I don't have any actual evidence of that, of course, because this is all legend, right? It's all really just...
I was wondering if the New York Times wrote about it. And since that first one that you mentioned was from like the 90s, right?
Yep, 94?
Like
95?
when the 5-year period was that all these ships went missing.
We'll get to it.
Okay.
So, that being said, 2 of those 9 ships apparently became lost near this place called Miyake-jima and Iwo-jima, which are about 750 miles apart, which doesn't make sense in the map that had like the 200 by 300 mile area.
Right.
So it's like a lot of these things don't necessarily add up in the whole scheme of things. There were never any bodies that were recovered or any wreckage. So it's like, did these things really disappear? You know what I mean? A book written by an American paranormal writer named Charles Berlitz in 1974, titled The Bermuda Triangle, of course, also makes mention of this Devil's Sea. I think he put like a whole chapter in his book just about this. And in this book, he claims that these 9 ships that became lost were modern ships of the time. This book is written in 1974. So, modern ships of the time, and several hundred of the crew members disappeared between the years of 1950 and 1954. That's a long-ass time ago. And ship technology is obviously incredibly different than it is now.
It was still fairly advanced between 1950 and 1954. Yeah. Like, they had radar technology at that point. They had radios. So, for them to just disappear is pretty haunting. I'm not saying that it would be completely different in 2020. Or 2021. Oh my God, we're so old. But it absolutely would be. It's just like so much more recent than I thought it was going to be.
And then in 1955, the Japanese government sent out a ship called the Kaio Maru No. 5 to investigate these incidents, only for this ship to also go missing. And these are what led to the area being labeled a danger zone.
It's like, okay, now it's starting to make sense. This is the Japanese phrasing for danger zone.
God. Berlitz is also the one to label this Devil's Sea the Dragon's Triangle, because he wrote a book later on in 1989 that he titled The Dragon's Triangle. So this author is just trying to make a bunch of money off of this one topic. And maybe he just made stuff up as he went or took like, this happened, I'm just gonna make this an even more intense thing with this one piece of evidence or whatever. Who knows? But in this book, he continues to theorize that 5 more Japanese military vessels went missing during some maneuvers near the coast in early 1942. And 1942, this is World War II times. And I'm just gonna say,
it's a lot of things that could have made that ship go missing.
Yeah, you can't pinpoint that on paranormal phenomenon because there's so many other things it could have been. This guy definitely really sensationalized a lot of this stuff. He concluded that the area is quote unquote unnatural and unstable, that ships have been disappearing for 1,000 years, and that some researchers say 3,000. And when I saw that, I was like, that sounds like a lot of bullshit.
Yeah, show me the records,
right?
Dog.
He also brings up UFOs a lot and USOs a lot.
Like
unidentified, like
sailing objects.
No, like submarine.
Oh,
like,
okay.
Underwater. So yeah, I mean, he talks about a lot of weird things. With any paranormal mystery, there's always going to be those that don't believe in them and that go out of their way to debunk these beliefs. So you could say Berlitz is like Mulder, and this other person I'm going to talk about is Scully, who's like, no, this is bullshit.
Eventually she believes, though.
I mean, when you get impregnated by an alien, right? Or no, is it Mulder's kid?
I think it was Mulder's kid, but it's such a hard show to keep up with.
Yeah. I think we tried to rewatch it and we got to that episode where the guy keeps like squeezing through all the crevices. The guy that can stretch his body, that can squeeze through the crevices, and
I don't remember which one we stopped on. I do remember we did watch that one though. It's not like it's a bad show. There's just so many things.
We even watched the remake.
The remake was weird too.
Yeah. In 1975, an author, also American, named Larry Kush published a book titled The Bermuda Triangle Mystery Solved. Very straightforward, to the point, tells you what's in the book on the cover. In this book, he debunked the Devil's Sea legend as well as that of the Bermuda Triangle, obviously in the title, because he liked to take the fun out of a good mystery, apparently. According to Kush, he sent letters to the relevant government offices. He even wrote to the American embassy in Tokyo and Japanese newspapers and magazines trying to figure out what happened and what's going on. All the responses came back with them having no knowledge of something called the Devil's Sea or any type of danger zone.
Danger zone. This is like an 8, 9, 10-year-old reference to Archer at this point.
Oh my god, has it been that long?
Archer started, I watched my first episode of Archer in Chicago, so yes.
Oh wow, okay. So that being said, there is an actual danger zone. Fuck. That's all I can think of now. So there is an actual zone put forth by the Maritime Safety Agency of Japan, and it's a warning of keeping 10 miles clear of Myojin-sho, and that's a submarine volcano located about 450 kilometers or 280 miles south of Tokyo. So it's a volcano that's kind of located in that area, an undersea volcano located in that little bit of area south of Tokyo. Apparently, that ship that I brought up earlier, that Kaio Maru number 5, it was the ship that was sent to investigate how that undersea volcano was doing and got lost on that particular mission on September 24th, 1952. So there is, evidence and reports of when this ship went missing, but it went to go investigate what was going on with this, undersea volcano. Yeah. And the research boat also only carried about 31 people and not 100, like Berlitz wrote in his book. This disappearance was attributed to the eruption of said undersea volcano. And though it did become active intermittently, like it would get active and then dormant and go, erupt whenever it felt like it, this could be the root cause of what caused this ship to disappear.
I mean, this is probably far-fetched, but I think we should consider the possibility of kaiju. Because I've been reading a lot about Godzilla vs. Kong, and I'm super excited about it.
All I'm thinking of now is,
Pacific Rim?
Yes.
Fucking love that movie.
We haven't watched the second one yet.
We have not. The John Boyega vehicle. I'd love to watch it.
Oh, wow. Okay, we should watch it then. In a book titled Curses, Hexes, and Spells, written by Daniel Cohen in 1974, he writes of legends of this dangerous dragon's triangle with tales going back centuries in Japan, and the most famous of which is this ship that goes missing. And it's just like, people really try to sensationalize all this.
They're really trying to sell books.
Yeah. And it really doesn't seem very credible now that you can just do all this research and there's evidence and people have already done all of this and found like, this is reports and paperwork from, this time, XYZ, whatever. Then the disappearance of one of the other boats was attributed to being a small fishing boat with either poor or no radio and not so perfect weather that caused it to disappear. And then further research found that those military vessels that Burles talked about or wrote about were actually fishing boats and that they actually sank outside the designated quote-unquote Dragon's Triangle. And then a report from September 30th, 1952 states a 60-ton ship named the Toshi Maru disappeared in that same stretch of sea as the research ship. So he concludes that ships like that research ship they met their demise by these undersea volcanoes or a rogue tidal wave or things like that.
I imagine with an undersea volcano too. Like there's got to be rock shifting.
Seismic activity and stuff like that.
And that's got to cause like rogue waves or like some form of tsunami that might not hit the shore, but it could be affecting stuff that's on the water.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff that happened and a lot of things that were sensationalized, and it's just a lot of really weird stuff kind of stacked on top of each other. But it makes me think like, nah, it's bullshit. But that's just me, because there's some things I really believe in that I'm like, oh man, no, that shit exists. And then there's some things that I'm just like, there's no way. There's just no way.
When people sensationalize things, it takes away, I don't know, just so much of the credibility. They could be telling the truth, and because of how they...
Ghost Adventures makes me not believe in ghosts. Man.
It's just watching Ghost Adventures, I just want to punch myself in the face for talking about anything paranormal, so I just avoid it at all costs.
I just love all the memes where it's like the EVPs and it's like, that tattoo's sick or something.
I hate it so much, dude.
Memes are so good. Okay. Despite some of these authors writing of really fancy tales about this quote-unquote dangerous area, when researching the subject of a supposed Dragon's Triangle, nothing really substantial comes up. All these writers do, like the writers that do write that this place is dangerous and that this happened and ships disappear, things like that. When you actually do the research, no one's really heard of any of these things. And the fact that Kush totally wrote letters to all these different places in Japan and got responses that were like, we don't know what you're talking about, it just makes me think that there really isn't anything to all of this. But you never know. It's pretty straightforward. It's a pretty straightforward tale of boats going missing, unfortunately, probably due to natural circumstances, but who knows? Maybe there is a Kraken out there or something, These interestingly legendary sounding titles of these books were just something of like a modern creation. The name The Devil's Sea and the Dragon's Triangle are just people trying to sell these things. It's just nuts. Of course, there's always going to be all kinds of explanations of how things go missing that Adam has probably covered in his episode of, like the Bermuda Triangle when you did that. There are theories of like methane hydrate fields on the bottom of the ocean in the area of these missing ships. These fields are like these pockets of gas that kind of quote unquote explode when the temperature rises above 18 degrees Celsius or 64 degrees Fahrenheit, which makes it kind of terrifying to think that with climate change and warming waters, maybe other areas of the ocean or will start to have more ships go missing because all this stuff from the bottom of the ocean is going to start coming up,
There's so many things that we've covered where like just the basic chemical reaction can cause like catastrophic damage, like that one village that had that methane bubble or whatever it is that just like spilled down the side of the mountain and killed everything.
Yeah.
Like that's just stuff that can happen. And hearing about it this way, I mean, a ship, if the buoyancy level of the liquid below them goes away, right? The ships can just disappear.
Yep. So it's like these methane pockets are apparently like ice-like deposits of gas that break away from the bottom of the ocean, and they start rising up to the surface, and it causes a whole like buttload of bubbles to happen on the surface. And I'm not sure if you guys know this, but when water gets or liquids, when they get super bubbly, it does mess with the buoyancy, and things can't float on the surface anymore. So
Hashtag Mythbusters.
Yeah, and so boats and ships and stuff, they start to sink. If you've never watched like a Titanic documentary, you should. They're so fun to watch. It's very, very fascinating. But it leaves no trace that these ships were ever there, because they don't break. They don't get fucked up. They just sink. Which is absolutely nuts.
I mean, if you just go under a certain level of water, like even if you're not damaged, you can just flood, right?
Yeah.
Your ship will just flood, and there goes your fucking buoyancy. Yeah. Like, goodbye metal ship to the bottom of the ocean.
It makes me really worried about this recreation of the Titanic that they're thinking of doing. Because it's like, don't make another unsinkable ship. That shit's not gonna fly.
I get we have better technology now, but still, there's shit that can happen that can go very wrong. Yeah. I just hope they have enough lifeboats on the fucking thing this time.
Oh, God, dude. Oh, man. Don't make them out of cork. That's all you gotta
I feel like buying a ticket in Leonardo DiCaprio's name and sending it to him.
Shut up.
Like, have fun, bro.
Shut up. Okay. Yeah, and what I really wonder is if there is a way to track these little methane bursts, these methane bubbles that come up, if you can track it on radar or something, that'd be really neat. I don't know if there's that technology.
I don't think we have that yet.
That'd be cool though. Then of course there are the undersea volcanoes that seem to be common in the area. I know, like, isn't Hawaii like part of this ring of fire, which is a bunch of volcanoes or something like that?
I think so. Like, I know the Philippines.
It's in the Pacific Ocean or something, right?
The Philippines for sure is. It's that giant tectonic plate. The Ring of Fire is like the border where it meets like all the other tectonic plates.
Okay.
That's the Ring of Fire, and I'm not sure how many of them are. I know there's a fuck ton though.
Yeah. So these undersea volcanoes seem to be common in the area. Apparently small islands just disappear and then new ones form all the time. I think that's so cool, but terrifying. And there's obviously going to be seismic activity that happens because of them. It's an active area, and I'm sure the waves get nuts. It's gotta be, right? A biologist named Ivan Sanderson wrote an article titled "The 12 Devil's Graveyards Around the World." And this article was published in 1972, and he wrote about a thing called vile vortices. I think you might have covered that, did you?
I don't know. It's been a while.
Yeah, these are strange anomalies, and these areas have radio instruments and compasses get thrown off when pilots have flown over them. Like in the Devil's Sea, when pilots have flown over them, these things have happened before. Books about the Bermuda Triangle claim similar things and compare the two areas with having these strange magnetic circumstances, which I think is fascinating. I've never heard of this quote-unquote Devil's Sea before, so it's pretty neat to me. And then there's obviously going to be the fun old-school lore and myth about these undersea volcanoes that speak of these mythical creatures that live in the ocean. And supposedly these mythical creatures that live under the water kind of like to make the water rough and suck ships down into their layers. Layers as in Lairs. God, the English language is so weird. Not Layers, like cake.
Underwater onions.
Dragons are common creatures that are used in these tales. Water dragons, things like that. Sea serpents.
Gojiras.
Gojiras? Oh, I can't wait to watch that movie. I hope he's not a bad guy. Then there's a cool tale that I read about Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan?
Kublai Khan.
The grandson of Genghis Khan. Apparently he tried to travel through the Devil's Sea in the 13th century in order to invade Japan. And while doing so, the weather suddenly changed and the fleet got struck by a typhoon. And supposedly 40,000 men died.
Holy
and the
shit.
ships were destroyed. And when they tried to return years later, they came across the same weather conditions again. And supposedly it was all natural, But you
Kubla
never
Khan
know.
coined the phrase #fuck this.
So they never did it again because they're like, what the fuck? And it makes you really wonder, like, how it happens twice.
They probably tried to go during the same season. It was probably typhoon season, which is similar to hurricane season in the United States, or magic.
Magic. So based on different iterations, you can kind of see how different ways of telling the story can give it like different vibes. Different authors give forth different sizes and areas of this Devil's Sea. But if we're taking like Cush's facts as the facts, then it's understandable how they got warped into this spooky tale of boats going missing and just this terrifying environment that the ocean really is. The ocean is a terrifying place.
The ocean is scary, dude.
And you can never, it's like growing up, they always told us like, never turn your back on the ocean because you never know what it's going to do.
It's flipping you off the whole time.
That's fucked up.
It's like Moana, except it's just like double fingers.
Oh
like,
my God. What if they did that in Moana? I'd laugh so hard. Okay. But who doesn't love a good mystery? I think it's fun to imagine that stuff like that really exists, that there's a place other than the Bermuda Triangle where, I mean, it's sad because you don't want to lose people, but the places that ships go missing and stuff like that, it's absolutely fascinating. Just like how I think the sinking of the Titanic is absolutely fascinating. It's really sad, but like, I want to know the science behind it and I want to know the reasons why it happens. It's really interesting. But there's a reason why Berlitz wrote multiple books, because that shit sells. People want to know about mysteries and weird things. And, I just think it's neat that I found out about this thing I'd never heard before about a second Bermuda Triangle.
Except this one, they literally were just making up a bunch of bullshit that as soon as someone's like, I'm just going to send some letters and see if this is true.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, most that's not true. Never heard of that. Never heard of that.
But ships did go missing. Those ships actually did go missing. So it's something that is based in fact.
Right.
But yeah.
The book should say based on a true story.
Yeah, it's based on a true story. It's just like Haunting at Hill House all over again.
Is that based on a true story? I don't think it is.
Well, like when Steve writes his book, it's like based on a true story.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's my story of the Devil's Sea.
Pretty good. Otherwise known as the Dragon's Triangle.
Yeah.
So, solid stuff.
I think that's just racist, calling it the Dragon's Triangle.
Yeah, it totally is because it's like...
It's because it's Asian.
Yeah, it's Asian. They're like, we'll just toss dragon on there and everyone knows Bermuda Triangle. Dragon sounds cooler. So... It's pretty messed up. It is interesting though when you look at stuff like that and you look at statistics of how often ships go missing. Like there's a period of time that sparked the interest, I'm guessing, where they saw like that's a lot of ships in a short amount of time. So I'm going to take that statistical capture where it was abnormal and decide to make this a sensational story 25 years after the fact and hopefully sell a bunch of books.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fascinating that there's so many people that are like, I'm in the Matrix.
Wow. You know what's scarier than the idea of a mystery part of the sea that things can go missing that you can actually quantify? Is an underwater fucking volcano that randomly goes off.
Dude.
Or methane pockets that might just make a ship fucking disappear under the waves.
I've never been to the big island of Hawaii with the live volcano that's still going. I don't know if it's still going off, but when I was a kid, it was just going off a lot. And it wasn't like a Mount St. Helens where it was like spew.
Right.
But it was
Mount
just
St.
like,
Helens wasn't like spew, it was like bye.
but this one's more like bleh, bleh, you know?
It's like spitting.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
What?
We almost got through the whole show without talking about this. And if anyone tuned out, you're fucking lost. But, so Robin and I saw the grossest thing I have ever fucking seen. And I felt so bad. So for the Super Bowl,
here's a little bonus story at the end of the episode.
We ordered wings because I couldn't find any wings to cook. We went and picked them up. We're driving home and some dude in front of us pulled over. He didn't pull over. Excuse me. He stopped at the light and he was directly in front of our car. He stopped at the light and he opened his door and I couldn't really see what he was doing. And I thought, oh, he's dumping out coffee because of the color of the liquid and the fact that it was splashing everywhere. And I sort of leaned over a little bit and I saw him. I was like, oh, that dude is throwing up. And he was very sick. And I mean, this is the middle of the day. This is 3 p.m. So, and he was driving straight. He was driving fine. So I don't think he was drunk, but he was just unloading his guts into the streets.
It was gross.
At this red light, I was like, this dude is vomiting so much. And Robin noticed it. And then we started moving. The light went green.
And then he
closed
drove
his door.
Through it.
And like, I wasn't going to bring up that part, but yeah, he drove through it.
He drove through it, and like the tires obviously splashed up everything. So it's just like vomit
so I was going
up everywhere.
really slow. I was way far behind him so we wouldn't catch a splash. I swerved around it. And we're driving behind him, and he takes some huge swigs of water from a water bottle.
It's like spitting it out the window.
And spits it out the window. I'm like, he's washing his mouth out, that poor dude. And we drive a little bit more. We get to the next block, and it's another stoplight. It's red again. And he opens his door and just starts all over. And I'm like, this guy has so much puke in him.
It was projectile vomiting.
But he's aiming it down at this point. Oh my God. So this time, though, the light is only red for a second. And then it goes green. And it goes green. And he closes his door and he starts driving. I told Robin, I was like, that dude was still puking. And all of a sudden, we just see it coming out of the driver's side window.
So gross.
He's projectile vomiting into oncoming traffic. He's not hitting any cars. And I'm like, this poor dude. I seriously thought to myself, like, someone needs to check on him. I'm hoping he's driving to a hospital right now. And like, you could see that he was losing steam as he was driving because the next like distance between stoplights is like 2 or 3 miles. So instead of it just projectiling out the window, and I know this is super gross, but we just had to tell you guys, all of a sudden it's like, there's less of it, but it's not going as far. So it's like, he's driving straight still. He's driving better than most people drive, and he's turning his head to throw up, and he's turning his head to throw up. And it's like, it just starts hitting the inside of his car and like exploding out the window in this gross mist that I'm trying to swerve around. And everyone behind me is going super slow, so no one has to drive through it. And finally, he gets in the turning lane at one of the stoplights to go somewhere else. And I was like, I feel like we need to follow him. Like, we're committed. We need to know how this ends. But it was just the most batshit crazy thing. If you're a listener to Scaryish, I hope you survived. I hope you're okay. But it was just the most batshit crazy thing I've ever seen.
I seriously almost vomited in the car watching this happen.
If you've
disgusting.
Seen Team America World Police,
oh my God,
where the puppet vomits in the alley like twice the amount that its body size is, it was like that in real life if the puppet was driving.
Yeah, that's what I literally compared it to. I was like, that is fucking disgusting.
So we're like, when we get back to the house, before we let anyone eat, because we had 3 people over, we had 2 people over, which are part of our bubble. I was like, before we say anything about this, let everyone eat, and then we'll talk about the puke story. And we got home, we went inside, we're like, so we just saw a guy throw up. Like, we could not help it. We had to share the story immediately. So, bonus story, you got a fucking TV show review, you got to find out we're living in a simulation.
This is like an hour and a half, dude.
This is one of the longest episodes we've had in a long time, and it had everything, y'all.
It had, movie or TV reviews, 2 stories, one about really fucked up mind shit, one about more not so scientific stuff, and then you got a nice sick vomit story.
Yeah, so we hope you enjoyed it. This has been the legendary episode 165. So if you have a story, it doesn't have to be about vomiting in your car or living in a simulation or anything like that, but if you have a story that's paranormal, supernatural, spooky, spiritual, creepy, coincidental, true crime, extraterrestrial. I'm not done.
Oh, sorry.
Please send it to us. You can email storytime@scaryish.com or go to our website, scaryish.com. Click on the link that says contact us. That form comes directly to us, or hit us up on any of our social medias. Facebook is facebook.com/scaryish podcast. Twitter is @scaryish_pod, and Instagram is @scaryish_podcast. We would love to hear from you. Robin, if folks would like to donate to us, how can they do so?
You can go to patreon.com/scaryish_podcast. Those are monthly donations. Tiers start at $1, and at $1 you get ad-free episodes, which is great. And what was that?
Okay, Tony the Tiger.
And we also have like merch tiers. So I'm about to send out some Nessie stickers this month. And then keychains are coming out in, a month or 2. And there's always going to be more stuff that comes out. Different things. I release different things. That's how it rolls. And, so hopefully you guys support us on there. If you're not into the monthly donation thing, you can also do one-time donations if you go to ko-fi.com/Scaryish podcast. And those are, again, one-time donations. All your donations go to helping us upgrade our studio setup, keep us going, give us a little bit more time to do this. It's great.
Indeed. So that is everything we have for this episode.
Thank you for staying this long.
Right. Go ahead and sign us out.
Keep on creeping on. We'll talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.